It's my role to find you interesting presentations throughout the Congress, and I think I found a fantastic one. It was on early life and epigenetics, and I'm delighted to be joined by Assam El Osta from Monash University in Melbourne. Now tell me, what was the title of your presentation and what were you talking about?
I'm happy to be here. I was talking about the role of epigenetics. So this is an old phenomenon that's associated with genetics but sits above the genome, and the role of epigenetics in utero programming. So developmental and pregnancy. So early life nutrition and its role in the developmental progression of disease.
Okay, so let me put that in simple language. So if you think of the genome as being an instruction manual, well then epigenetics, because DNA isn't the whole story, epigenetics is the marks, the post-it notes, if you like, that the environment puts on the genome in order to modify the genome, so that it's modify how it works, so that there's infinite variation in the way that the genome can respond to environment.
That's right, and these post-it notes actually, these chemical marks leave a mark on the genome. Some of them are short-lived and others are longer-lived. And DNA methylation is thought to be quite dynamic.
And that's the post-it note.
That's the post-it note, like the chemical mark. And does leave a lasting impression on the genome and our genes.
Okay, so now how does that relate to diabetes? Because people are thinking, what on earth has this got to do with diabetes?
Well, that's a really good question. So there is a phenomenon called metabolic memory and hyperglycemic memory. And we've not really understood the mechanisms that underpin high glucose memory. And we've defined that these epigenetic post-it notes tend to be remembered on our genes and could explain why our genes remain switched on.
So if a woman during pregnancy is, for instance, either has a gestational diabetes or has very high carbohydrate, for instance, somehow the baby's DNA will be marked or altered in some way so that that high glycemic environment is somehow remembered.
So that is the implication, that you are what you eat and perhaps what your parents ate. And so there is this now growing trend of research that's now studying this phenomenon by examining epigenetic changes. These tiny chemical marks, these post-it notes that are sometimes really hard to forget. And that's because they are written in a way that transcend from one generation to the next.
And what implications does that have for the future?
So the implication there is epigenetics has an important role in development and progression of diabetes and its complications.
And does the practical implication of that mean that we should be much more rigorous about telling mothers during pregnancy what to eat and not to eat?
I think the message is always going to be lifestyle and diet is going to be critical to understanding not only our waistline, but also nurturing the next generation. And that represents their genome and their epigenetics.
Now, there have recently been some drugs that are targeted at the epigenome. I'm thinking actually of a drug for one of those very severe spinal problems. Are there any drugs that can affect the epigenome? Is there a way in the future that we might somehow alter those marks in order to restore a baby exposed to high glycemic environment, to restore it to a normal one?
There is an epigenetic therapeutic index, and you're right, there are drugs that can dramatically alter the epigenome, and And some of the best known drugs are involved in histone deacetylase enzymes, which are involved in epigenetic modification. These can be reversed. And the idea behind epigenetics is that these post-it notes are not written for life and are quite dynamic and can potentially be reversed. So these drugs have the potential to actually rewrite many of the genes that are switched on and implicated in renal diabetes.
Absolutely fascinating. Well, thank you so much for explaining that. It's a really interesting area of basic science, but I think that perhaps 5-10 years we may see some real outcomes from this research in the prevention of diabetes. At least that's the hope. Sam, thank you so much.
Thank you.